There is a Solution for That is sponsored by VARC Solutions. VARC Solutions helps small businesses succeed by delivering expert QuickBooks bookkeeping, consulting, quick-base development, and integrated solutions. If you own a small to medium-sized business that uses QuickBooks or QuickBase, the experts at VARC Solutions can help. In business since 1999, with people who care and the knowledge and experience to solve your toughest problems. Visit varcsolutions.com for all your QuickBooks needs. Welcome back to another edition of There's a Solution for That, where we help small businesses succeed by discussing challenging business problems and best-in-class solutions. All right, welcome everybody to the latest episode of There's a Solution for That. We, as always, have an incredible content, incredible guest for you on the show today, talking about, honestly, a really, really important topic. For those of you that have been following the show, you know that a lot of the things that we do as a company at VARC Solutions is QuickBooks based. So, sometimes that's the context for a lot of the conversations that we have. We're working with small businesses. But I will say that, one of the goals that we have as a business is really to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our clients at whatever stage of growth they're at, right? So when we are working with a brand new business, we want to be able to get them started. When they're starting to grow and scale, we want to make sure that we're providing solutions for them as they grow and scale. And quite frankly, at some point during a business's life cycle, if things are going really, really well, the business is growing, eventually they're going to run out of capacity, so to speak, within QuickBooks. In other words, it's not going to be able to do everything they need it to do. Okay. And that's just acknowledging the reality, right? There's no such thing as a perfect solution that's going to fit every business at every stage of growth. And so we want to make sure that we're taking care of our clients when they outgrow QuickBooks, right? And so that's a little bit of the context for why I wanted to have George and Robert from Go to My ERP on the show today, because they are experts at that next stage of growth. Like when somebody is outgrowing QuickBooks, what's next? Like what are the options and what are the considerations and things like that? So I wanted to really dive deep into that conversation today. So with no further ado, George, Robert, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about you and why we're here together having this conversation.
Excellent. Hi, my name is Robert Epley with Go to My ERP, one of the co-founders here and CEO. So I take care of a lot of the operations, and a lot of the things we're going to talk about today is kind of what I do. And that over there is my partner, George.
Hi, everyone. I'm George, and I'm the other co-founder and CTO at Go to My ERP. I am largely responsible for a lot of our operations at Go to My ERP and other entities that we're going to talk about in this show. So looking forward to this.
Fantastic. Well, I got the two right guys in the room to have this conversation, because I know, especially when we're talking about somebody that's even thinking about going, they've been on QuickBooks for a while and now they're thinking about what's next. That's not a simple conversation. That's not just oh, let me go to the store and buy this next new thing, right? There's a conversation that needs to happen. And so we're going to talk about some of the details about that. And let's kick it off and really just kind of, I want you to kind of help us understand as an audience, what are some of the signs? What are some of the indications? Like if you went to a doctor and you said, my elbow hurts, what are those things that you're going to be asking a customer, or what are the signs that a customer is going to come to you and say, I think I need what's next?
Yeah, that's a pretty common question, as a matter of fact, Brad. The people who are generally in that condition, they feel it already. They know it's happening to them. They may not necessarily know why it's happening to them, but I'm sure they have a pretty good sense of it. It depends again, largely on the size of an organization. Smaller organizations can almost identify explicitly where their problem is because they've only got a few people. The processes are really dependent. They're mostly human driven. When we get into larger organizations where we're going from QuickBooks into organizations that have gone into the next level, which is, I think when this SMB space would be the most next appropriate level. That's when it becomes a little more difficult to understand, like, well, what's really driving that problem? Um, from entities that are in the QuickBooks realm, they typically will end up, here's one fantastic one for you that I'm sure Vark deals with all the time: data corruption, data problems, data compression, things where, from not only on a hosting side, but definitely on a consulting side, the customer is just hitting the upper limit of what, in this particular example, QuickBooks Enterprise can do for them. Operationally, it may be solid. I mean, typically there's nothing wrong with it. The problem is that the volume of transactions has just exceeded the capacity of the product. And then from that point, yeah, go ahead.
And what does that look like? And so, in other words, let's say somebody has been using QuickBooks for 10 years, maybe even 15 years, right? And the file is getting bigger.
Yeah.
How does that present itself? Like, how does somebody know I've got this problem that Robert's talking about?
Oh, I think that's a good question for George, actually. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, we see this actually with customers who may end up having a lot of third parties into their QuickBooks connected, and some symptoms that are almost like a surefire way is when you have so many connectors that, for example, their TLG file, which is the log file that QuickBooks maintains, grows so fast. Typically, the users of QuickBooks are not very well versed or exposed to the files and what is happening in the back end of QuickBooks. And there are a lot of details related to that that provide a lot of indications on whether your QuickBooks is either performing well or not. Is it prone to corruption or not? So as a small example, a TLG file generally should be within 1 megabyte, right? But it starts at 320K and it grows to, 100 megs, let's say. Sometimes you see them go to 6 gigabytes and 10 gigabytes, right?
Oh,
When
wow.
you get to that point, you have log files in QuickBooks that are maintained that now expose the company file to constant corruptions. And I'm sure, Brad, you guys have seen that quite a lot as well on your end, and you end up dealing with them. And when you continue doing that on a regular basis, the frequency of corruption just increases and the frustration increases, and then it just becomes a bit of a snowball, and the customer just doesn't really know why it's happening, right? So they're like, well, fix it for me. I don't know. And at one point, it's no longer a matter of fix it for you. I could keep it till, I could keep fixing it all the time, but the problem, the root cause is not being addressed. So this is what Rob was referring to and how you actually can go outside of the parameters.
That's excellent. So I'm gonna restate a few things just in my own words. I process things a little bit differently sometimes. So basically, if someone is having to do a file or a company rebuild, a file rebuild, going into the file utility to verify and rebuild data, if they're having to do that on a recurring basis, that's a pretty good sign. If I imagine if they're getting kicked out of QuickBooks, like they're just doing their thing, and then all of a sudden QuickBooks closes and they got to reopen it, and that's happening over and over again, that would probably be a pretty good sign. And I know like this is getting geeky and techie. I know the TLG file, transaction log file, for those of you that are not sure familiar with TLG files. But that log file, it's like, what is the function of that? It's to my understanding is it's a list of things that have happened primarily, I think, since your last backup, right? And so, a lot of people, when they're on a server, they're just expecting the server to do backups, but QuickBooks doesn't know about those backups to clear out the log file, right? So any other kind of like symptoms that you guys see?
Yeah, so actually, I'm glad you touched on the TLG, and there are two aspects or symptoms that could potentially indicate some corruption or issues with running into some limits. So the file verification and rebuild is actually something that we recommend all customers do on a regular basis, regardless, right?
Okay.
Because this actually does maintain the integrity of the company file, and it fixes errors most of the time on its own. And as it relates to the TLG, there's one aspect of the backup that most users don't usually do, either on purpose or not, because actually it could take a bit longer. And this is called the rebuild with verification. What that does with I think it's called backup with full verify. That's I think what it's called in QuickBooks. And what that does is it actually goes through the process of verification and rolling in the TLG file into the main company file so that it reduces the size of the TLG file. Depending on how active a customer is in QuickBooks, we recommend this to be done as frequently as weekly to maybe every month or so. And that needs to be maintained because once the TLG file grows beyond, let's say, 1 GB, that process no longer works. And you have to go through more drastic ways of actually addressing the TLG file. The other aspect of that actually points more towards corruption is when, well, one thing you mentioned is the QuickBooks crash. And the crash usually is preceded by your company file cannot open, please download the file doctor and run it and all that. The problem with that is that most of the time, even if the file doctor runs, a lot of users sometimes miss the fact that file doctor just wiped a whole bunch of their lists, for example, or customers. We have seen that. And in these situations, you literally have to roll back to a previous backup of your company file to get them. So yeah, there are a lot of symptoms that way.
Yikes, yikes. Well, and I know like so it sounds like one of the main symptoms, if you will, is some form of corruption. There's just something that's broken, something that's not working. You're doing everything you can. No matter what you do, this corruption keeps coming back. I know like we've dealt with a few of those in our past where, you know, somebody was using inventory extensively and they had price levels and units of measure, and there was like some corruption within the units of measure, and like they had thousands of them, right? Thousands of unit of measure entries, right? And no matter what we did, right, it was still there, not something that you can even fix through the user interface, right? There's those kinds of problems. Any other symptoms we haven't touched on that just, again, just top level 30,000-foot view besides corruption that would give you an indication that maybe they're outgrowing?
Well, that's certainly from the software's architecture perspective. That's something for sure. But when we're talking about then some of the functionality aspects, they're again, as phenomenal as QuickBooks Enterprise is and as flexible as it is, you do start heading into some limitations around what you can really do with inventory, for example. Although you can get the lot and serial number tracking going in the platinum version of the product, uh, when you really start wanting to get deeper into costing, builds, the manufacturing, where it gets more complex other than just an assembly, uh, you do have to start considering larger or different types of systems that would augment that business process. That would get you into your manufacturing or potentially even some of your larger wholesale distribution solutions as well. So that's one area. General complexity, right? We're here with QuickBooks, which has gotten us to a several $1 million organization, or even perhaps in some of the customer cases we've seen, $100 million. Well, I'll tell you right now, QuickBooks Enterprise is not necessarily designed for $100 million company, but it worked. But it did present challenges to the operations teams trying to get certain data out of it to be functional on a global scale. So there is a tap out point. So you've got business complexities, which is probably the number one thing, because although there is a phenomenal ecosphere of, third-party products, their limit is the ERP or the QuickBooks system. So even though they can handle a lot of stuff, they still back end into QuickBooks, and you're still kind of dealing with its own limitations. So complexity is one realm. Then you can get into the, like, for example, compliance, depending on the type of industries that you're in. Um, Maybe even some reporting requirements, right? I know we've worked a lot with you on organizations that have had different reporting requirements where they will take on, for example, the VARC services around QuickBase and stuff like that, or they'll get into special or customized reporting. But that is showing us or presenting to us that QuickBooks just isn't enough at that point.
Right. Yeah. So it's like just some of the feature sets will take you so far,
Right.
and then you start pushing them to the limits. Stuff starts not necessarily breaking, but just feeling like this should be easier. Like, why am I having to come up with 5 workarounds to do this
Yes.
thing that I really shouldn't have to have a workaround for? Those
Right.
types of things. It sounds like it's partly what you're talking about.
So shining light.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I know we've referenced QuickBooks Enterprise Solutions a few times, but I think the same story is true in QuickBooks Online. Maybe not
Sure.
so much on the technical behind the scenes, file structures and TLG things and that sort of thing, but it's the same story, right? QuickBooks
Well, but
Online,
even
even if you're on QuickBooks Online Advanced, that's going to take you so far, but there's still some functionality there that is lacking for some of those larger companies.
right, and if I understand correctly too, and I could be completely off the reservation on this one, there's a 750,000 something limit to QuickBooks Online. What is that? Is that the actual transactional limit?
Yeah, I think it's probably similar to desktop, right? Where it's
Yeah.
targets or um, you know, connected things behind the scenes within the
Right.
data. Yeah, there's going to be a limit. And I know, like, even in desktop, there's historically there's 14,500 names, or with enterprise maybe up to 100,000 names. But similar story, right? At some point, if you're growing and you're scaling, 100,000, seems like a big number, or like 100,000 customers or 100,000 vendors. That seems like a huge number for a
Right.
small company. And at some point, that's a small number for a big company. Right?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
so it is relative. So let me ask you this. Let's kind of
Yeah.
shift gears a little bit. Like, what are some of the things that a small business that is in that scaling mode and maybe is on the verge of outgrowing it, what are some of the band-aids that they might
Yeah.
try to get another year? You know, I always
Sure.
hear that story, right? Can I just get another year out of the software before I have to go spend more money?
Well, everybody, what you can do is give Brett a call and his team over there and say, "Hey, build me a new shell file," right? So that's like start there, because that will potentially get you that 1 year you're looking for to make that decision. But if that really doesn't become kind of the if that's not good enough, that's when somebody really starts needing to look at, things like third-party solutions. And if the third-party solutions are still hitting that upper limit of what you actually have grown into as an organization because you're just too complex, um, you've got that what I call operational sprawl. You're just getting bigger in weird ways. Um, it's time to kind of really pump the brakes and begin understanding what's up above QuickBooks and these third-party systems. And that's where you start really pulling in expertise to start diagnosing what is hurting you the most and trying to solve for that and trying to keep that into one system. So,
Yeah.
rather than trying to rely on all of these other like workarounds and, make work and things like that, it just becomes a headache. So you might as well just start looking up and trying that direction.
Bite the bullet eventually and at
Eventually,
least explore what's next.
correct.
One of the things that I think is funny about what you said, and you probably didn't think it was funny at all, but again, I've got a weird sense of humor, so apologies in advance to everybody. Is you talked about like the when operational teams start getting frustrated, and it's like you start out a business, you don't have an operational team.
Right, just
You
you.
got you.
That's just you.
You. You got you and George. You and George started a business. It was just the two of you. You probably
Yep.
made it pretty far of just the two of you. And then it's like at some point you hired folks. Now you got
Yeah.
salespeople and you got project managers and then you got operational teams. You know, at some point, yeah, you've got too many people with their hands somehow touching the software in QuickBooks as the example. You've got different roles and permissions and different things like that. But at some point, you don't want those people in the books. You don't want them in the accounting. And so being able to have a bigger system that's more modularized and siloed for different parts, but still have it all work together, I think is part of the challenge. And so let's talk about that then. So let's say you're at that point, you're feeling those growing pains. You definitely know I need something next. I need the next thing. Or hey, maybe we just hired a CFO and that CFO is going, guys, you guys are still using QuickBooks? Seriously?
Right.
You need to be thinking about this next thing. So what are at a 50,000 foot view, what are some of
Sure.
those next options, just to give our listeners some clarity on like what are the players in that space?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So although at that point the world is your oyster, the most common next generation ERP systems that are helping the small to mid-size organizations are things like the most prevalent one would be NetSuite is one. Then you have your Sage products called Sage Intacct. What else is coming around? Oh, then you've got things like Acumatica and Microsoft Business Central. So these are four core systems, and to a lesser degree, Intuit Enterprise Suite, right? I mean, that's the promise at this point.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that's where we have a lot of choices depending on the type of operations and needs that the organization's presenting. Then you start really kind of like looking at these as alternative solutions that can actually handle the capacity of the new business.
Well, let me ask kind of a related question to the list that you kind of gave there. So yeah, we're Intuit Enterprise Suite just came out September-ish of 2024. I know Intuit's got big plans for it to really address the mid-market. But like you said, it's a relatively new solution, effectively, right? It's similar
Yes.
to QuickBooks Online. But you've got these other solutions that have been around for 10, 15 years in that mid-market space. Um, like you said, namely, NetSuite, they're the ones spending a lot of marketing dollars that I think a lot of people
Huge,
hear about.
huge amounts.
And then the others, Sage 100, Sage 300. I know there's a number of that you guys work with
Right.
specifically. Here's my question though. You've got these two worlds, in my opinion. You got these two worlds. You've got desktop software world, and you've got QuickBooks Online cloud-based software world. When you guys are having those conversations with folks about that next thing, are you having conversations with them about, hey, let's stay on an on-prem desktop installed solution, or are you recommending folks go to the cloud? Like, what are some of the factors that maybe somebody needs to consider as part of the decision, not
Right.
just what's next, but next desktop, next cloud? Like, what are some
Sure.
of those conversations look like?
Yeah. So that's a multifactorial answer,
Yeah,
but the best way to kind of still consider it is once we've determined what the absolute need is as it relates to functionality, uh, you still have phenomenal choices within the desktop realm that are completely viable solutions for organizations. Sometimes organizations, by mandate, don't even have control over that, and they still need something that's relatively within their own control. I'll give you, for example, I won't tell you which entity it was, but a very significant three-letter agency contacted us in search for the replacement of QuickBooks at all their field offices. I'll let you guess who that is. But they were using QuickBooks Enterprise at all the field offices. Their mandate was they could not be on a SaaS, pure SaaS solution. They had to be able to have a desktop application or similar to a desktop application that got deployed internally using their own infrastructure.
Mm.
So that was a very specific purpose for not going out just to something like NetSuite or Sage Intacct, for example. You do have to filter out what's going to work best for organizations, because I'll give you a direct example. Sage 100, which is also formerly known as Mass 90, at this point has nearly a 40-year track record in the ERP space. It has significant bells and whistles, refined functionalities that most ERP systems would hope to achieve at that price point. So now the question is, what's more important to the customer? Is it having all of that stuff in one place, or having it kind of in a SaaS solution where you have to continuously piece on solutions to complete it and have an equivalent?
Right.
So it's complex. It's not an easy solution. Most people still will want to go and become serverless. But at the end of the day, it may not necessarily be the best for them.
Right. Well, and I know we deal with the same thing even before somebody is outgrowing QuickBooks. We have that same conversation a lot of times, right? Where it's like, hey, QuickBooks plus X, Y, and Z can be a decent solution. But and George, I know you guys have seen this even more so than we have, especially when you get more and more complicated. You know, sometimes those third-party solutions, while there's big promises, they don't always integrate well. The data transfer doesn't always work well, right? And so, talk a little bit about some of the challenges of having maybe a core system like QuickBooks plus this, and this add-on compared to like what a true quote unquote ERP system would do, like functionally. Just, I mean, just in a day in the life of somebody that's living in those two alternative realities. What are some of the differences that somebody could expect by going into that all-in-one type of system?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, Brad, because I was actually wanting to chime in a bit earlier about some aspects of QuickBooks Desktop that are, I would say, comparably to a typical SaaS solution, or let's say modern web-based app. The integration points for QuickBooks Desktop are probably, I would say, more antiquated than other, even QuickBooks Online. So I don't want to get too technical, but the main term to look for in sort of some of the modern integrations is really RESTful APIs. And this is what most of the newer and Web 2.0 SaaSified ERP systems currently use. They are flexible, they are fast, they perform well. And QuickBooks Desktop does QuickBooks Desktop does not do that. QuickBooks Desktop actually relies on connectors, QWCs, and the API that is less than well performing, to be honest, and also not very scalable depending on the types of integrations you are wanting to have. So for instance, if you are needing to use QuickBooks for either connect it with some sort of EDI product or e-commerce like Shopify or something like that, this is typically a connector just like anything else in QuickBooks, except you need it to be running where QuickBooks is running 24/7, right? So now you need to have that server that has QuickBooks on it running that one connector. Now multiply that by 2, 3, 4, however many products you need to grow into based on your need. And even when you hit 2, you already hit a little bit of a technical snag as it relates to QuickBooks handling those synchronizations on a regular basis.
Right.
There are ways around it, but it becomes complex. It becomes intricate to manage. You might need multiple servers, multiple workstations. The list goes on. So it's not that it's not solvable. We solve it all day, every day, but it's not practical and it's not scalable. Now, you can say that, well, I have, a bunch of products that I run as synchronizations or integrations like Transaction Pro or SASANT or any other things that don't necessarily need to run on a regular basis. Those are perfectly fine. Would they contribute to the integrity of the file, the company file you're working with? Maybe, right? They could, but potentially cause corruptions and that kind of thing. But from a performance perspective, integration and scalability, you want to keep in mind that when you are growing from the aspect of things that are needing to be running 24/7 to run your business, these are going to have adverse effects on how you implement and maintain those types of connections.
Well, great addition on there, George. I mean, and I'm going to keep going back to some of the core concepts that I keep hearing. When you get big enough where you've got someone like you on your team, by the way, where it's like something's not working and you're calling up the CTO to say, hey, we got a problem. We need real-time data. Our salespeople can't do their job. Our product managers can't do their job. We got a problem here. You don't want to be, reinstalling software and re-downloading patches and all that other stuff and like rebooting servers so that you can get this connector thing running again. And by the way, you can't do that until everybody's out of the file. I mean, all those types of things that people that are highly disruptive, nobody wants to deal with. Those to me, those sound like pretty good signs that we need to change. But I think I think like a business owner, yeah, like you mentioned. Okay, so if there's this nightly batch process that updates, great, no big deal, right? It runs once a day. But if you're talking about real time synchronization, I want my e-commerce inventory to be synced with my QuickBooks data real time, all the time, every 5 minutes, because it's that important that I have real time data. Yeah, and then you've got two or three of those things running, like you said. I can just forecast there's gonna be a problem, something's gonna stop working, or hopefully it'll even let me know. But I don't want to find out 3 weeks later that something hasn't been running because something stopped on the server. um so talk to me. I know you guys at Go to My ERP, you guys are specialists actually in the hosting of desktop software as well. And so talk to us a little bit about what you guys do in terms of that hybrid approach where somebody wants desktop software, on-prem software, but they also still want 24/7 cloud access to it. Like, how do you guys solve that?
Yeah, so really what ends up happening is just like everything else, it becomes a conversation about what's critical about why we're going to be taking care of that solution for them in this particular way. So that's where everything really kind of begins. And by considering the difference between maintaining that on-prem versus giving it to us to care for, uh, in most circumstances, our customer base does not necessarily have professional expertise to run their servers, to maintain their networks necessarily. Uh, if they do, they're outsourcing it quite regularly. So they have a managed service provider who comes in once a month or remotes in and helps with desktop maintenance or what have you. But the disconnect really comes from where a company who is growing and they're at that growth point where they start having multiple systems. Most general managed service providers do not have expertise in making sure that all of that stuff gets connected the way it needs to. So Go to My ERP fits a very specific niche when it comes to understanding not only the network environment that's needed for a healthy and stable utilization of the product, but then given the fact that we have so much experience with all products that have integrations with it, increases the chances that the product is not going to be unavailable when you need it the most, or not perform when you need it. And that's where the consideration really start seeing a lot of value for customers.
And I think also to add on to what Rob is saying, Brad, at least in honestly in most hosting providers cases, but for us especially because I can speak about us, we have been exposed to hundreds and hundreds of installations of QuickBooks and hundreds of the integrations. So there is almost no issue from a system perspective. And I want to separate one item from the other. And the accounting part is what you guys are awesome at, right? And I'm not talking about that. We have somebody on our team that does it. You guys do an amazing job at it. So, but what I want to concentrate on is really the system aspect of QuickBooks installation, how it runs in environments, what are things that stand in the way of it performing well, crashing, having issues, dealing with integrations that may conflict with each other. And I think we have a unique position simply because we have been exposed to hundreds of installations of everything, right? So we see what could go wrong and we document it all. So now we can actually provide a service that instead of spending 7 hours troubleshooting it, we can go look in our past experience and solve it in 5 seconds. So
yeah, no, that's the value of having not just a trusted advisor, but expertise, right?
Yeah.
I've become more and more appreciative of other people's expertise throughout my career. You know, I started out, it's like I just want to do everything. I can do everything, you know, and I want to do it myself, right? And at some point you hit a wall and you're like, well, gosh, I don't really know enough about that topic anymore to do that myself anymore. So being able to pick up the phone and call people like you guys with your level of expertise on that next level, especially, it's worth paying the price to get that expertise and to help you guys advise them. And so I want to start talking a little bit more about the price or the cost component of this, because I think that's a factor with, I mean, every business that we talk to, at some point they're going to say, how much is this going to cost me?
Right.
So I do want to talk a little bit more about the cost, but before I dive into that specific topic, I want to tangentially, if that's a word, talk about the cost component relative to some of the stuff you guys have already mentioned, which is, okay, what's the cost of somebody being down for a day? Right. If you've got, you know, if you're one person company and you can make do, it's fine. But now when you've got teams of folks, when you've got departments that are relying on this system and suddenly it's offline, unavailable, like you said, Robert, or what have you, now we've got people sitting around doing nothing. That's, as an owner, that's what makes me nervous, right? Right. When, hey, I'm paying these people and they're not able to do their work or do their job. So that's a huge cost, right? That
Yeah, I don't even think that's tangentially. I think that's very direct.
yeah, I was probably misusing the term.
Yeah, no, it's all right.
Maybe it's just another thing I wanted to say. That's what I was really trying to say.
Oh yeah, I mean, talk about hurt, right? We've on many occasions had those phone calls from prospective customers who have been challenged with outages, who have been challenged with who knows what, right? Just somebody pulled the wrong plug kind of thing. And it is a panic. It's a panic. I mean, if you're talking about, small organizations in the several of millions of dollars, which is very appropriate for a QuickBooks solution, QuickBooks Enterprise solution, let me be very clear. You're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a week to not be able to do the thing you do. That blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we talk about cost, it's just not how much, okay, I'm going to go pull up my credit card and how much is this new thing going to cost? It's the lost wages cost. It's the sales that are lost. It's the shipments that are delayed. It's all that stuff, right? But so let's just use that as the backdrop. There is a cost to not doing anything,
Sure.
especially if you've got some of these problems that we're talking about.
Mhm.
But let's do talk about the cost. So I know there's variances here, right? There's NetSuites and Acumaticas and Sages and all these different things. And so if I'm a QuickBooks user and I'm used to spending, max 1,000 a month or maybe, $4,000 or $5,000 a year, maybe on the higher end or higher side, what am I looking at when I start considering some of these more robust ERP systems?
Yeah, for equivalence sake, because we'd have to look at this kind of a SaaS solution uh, where QuickBooks Desktop was hosted, for example, because that kind of brings us into some benchmarking on hybrid hosting versus fully SaaS product. Anyway, the on the system and licensing scale, we're probably 30% higher than on a per user license basis. Um, from a QuickBooks Enterprise hosted user to another product that is like Sage Intacct, for example. So it generally runs about 30 to 40% more, depending on what um, add-ons there might have been or what's very specific functionality we're looking for. Uh, but yeah, I mean, we're not talking about too huge of a difference. I'm not trying to minimize that 30 or 40% isn't a big dollar amount, but in in practical terms, that difference is being made up in not having to deal with a third-party vendor, for example, right? Because sometimes those relationships are challenged and nobody wants to pick up the phone to get the server fixed. There could be a whole other aspect of that, but from a straight up one-to-one perspective, yeah, the licensing costs are a little bit more with these SaaS solutions. Here's the however, though. The products like Sage Intacct, for example, or NetSuite, uh, these companies are really aggressive on trying to bring business into their fold. And we have seen phenomenal deals that have actually brought QuickBooks customers into these newer generation systems and where the cost is almost in parity. And in some instances, less. So there's definitely there's some negotiation to be done, but cost wise, we're getting closer and closer, especially if Intuit continues to price itself higher and higher in the marketplace with QuickBooks Enterprise, you're going to start seeing a lot of parity occur within the costs.
Interesting. Um, So I like what you're saying. I mean, if I was a listener to this and I was going, oh my gosh, I thought this was going to cost a lot more. Sounds like you're giving me some good news, right? Which is that it doesn't have to be too much more.
Yep.
And then if there's things that I can roll into this one system versus paying three different software fees to three different companies, maybe it's not that much of a difference. But I will say from our experience, I mean, we've heard people that have said, "Oh, hey, I did switch to NetSuite.
Yep.
We've been going through a migration for a year. It's already $100,000.
Right.
So am I is that just one story that it could be a little bit more, but is there another story that it could be a whole lot more?
Oh, it could be a whole lot more for sure. But here's the remember. Again, there's some variables here. The first variable is that the only thing I mentioned so far was just the licensing cost,
Okay, yeah.
right? The other factors that then increase the pricing of a transition to a new solution is the fact that we're unifying processes. So where I've had this disconnected environment on this side, it wasn't just QuickBooks. It was QuickBooks and in order to come up with this one solution called Sage Intacct, right? So now the the return on investment, or at least the baseline, should be kind of like looked at between how many systems am I replacing, how many processes am I replacing, how much automation am I getting here? So yes, your investment first year will certainly be more expensive because it's a unification process. You're learning a new system. You're transferring historical data, perhaps. There could be a whole bunch of other factors of why that dollar amount has increased so much. But it is in direct correlation to the effort that has to be put in to grow. On average, I think first year implementation costs tend to hover around 2% of top line revenue. That's a pretty average number. But again, it depends on complexity.
Okay. So in other words, the bigger you are, the more revenue you have, more likelihood it's going to cost more because you've got more systems,
Got
you've
more
got
stuff.
more
Yeah.
more processes that you've got to maintain. One of the things you said that I want to touch a little bit more on because I think it's intriguing to me, and that's um, again, I want to think. I want to think. I know this is not true, but I want to think that okay, I've got this system. It's hanging on by a thread. I've got these systems working together. I've probably got a few workarounds I've had to implement to keep it going at some point, right? And now I'm like, look, this is just not working anymore. I want to think that I can just, flip a switch, migrate to a new system, and have everything kind of work the same,
Right.
but I don't think that's the reality, though, is it? Because, and I probably don't even want it to work the same because,
Absolutely.
right?
Cool. You're heading in the right direction. Correct. First of all, remembering what you did and where you're coming from could potentially have been very disorganized and never capturing all of the processes that were necessary to make you successful. So that's number one. Your team might be changing from day one till day, 5 years from then. There's a whole bunch of factors that have occurred, right? So why would I want to copy and paste those processes into a brand new system that's costing me 3, 5, or 8 times more expensive? I don't. I'm trying to improve. So your point is well taken that, yeah, there's a lot of change that's about to happen. And so there are risks associated with that. Along with those risks are costs. But that's why you hire a team who's done it before to mitigate those risks and offset them as much as possible and allow them to be your doctor, so to speak. Have them prescribe to you what it is you should be doing involved in that process.
Right. Well, do you guys have you guys ever heard that? I guess used to be called an old wives' tale. About the mother who always cuts the end off the ham before it gets put in the oven, and now that's passed down 5 generations, and the question is, why do we do that? And nobody seems to know. And you finally talk to the great great grandmother that's still alive, and she's like, oh, well, our oven wasn't big enough, so we had to cut off the end, right? But that's now the ovens are big, but they're still doing it that way. They don't even know why, right? I for whatever reason, I always think of that story when I think about like managing change and why we always do what we all have always done. But I
Perfect.
think you got these new systems, you got this more robust ERP system. It's probably going to do things better in most cases, right? And
Yeah,
that's going to require you to change how you do things. But
absolutely.
but quite frankly, it's like I don't think I've talked with a single business owner ever, okay, and that's a strong word, ever, that said, "Hey, I want to migrate to a new system, and I'm fine with everything that we're doing being different." Okay, they always
Never
kind
happened.
of
That's right.
they
Yeah.
want it to be like, no, can we make the system do it the way we want it
Yes,
to be done, right?
correct.
So isn't that a little bit of a I don't know, a conflict or a challenge in terms of some of those projects?
It's an unexperienced opinion.
Yeah.
This is the thing, Brad, George, Robert, we do this stuff every day. So yeah, it makes perfect sense that why would I do it that way? I should be doing it this way. But if you're a business owner who, by the way, started off with QuickBooks and is now in their seventh, eighth, or ninth year of utilization of that product. It's a really hard thing to abandon ship on when it comes to your process, your emotion, what you know, how you know it. It, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that they want to be able to replicate that, right? Not necessarily the best decision, but
Right. So I think the moral of the story is just what if you're even on the fence about this or you're considering this, just be ready for some change because it's coming.
Mhm.
No
Yep,
matter what you do, there's some change coming, right?
hard and
Uh,
fast. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that migration process or migration component of it, right? You've made the decision to switch. You're going down that road. You've hired folks like Go to My ERP to help advise you and actually to help get this thing done, which is crucial to leaning on folks that have expertise and experience doing it. One of the questions that I wanted to ask was you're having these conversations. I know you guys have a full scale like business process audit. You're going through all these things and tell me about these different systems that you're using and how are you using it and walk me through a day in the life. You're doing all those things. What are some of the deal breakers? Like you get to this point in this conversation and you have to advise the client that this is not going to work, right? Even if it's this new system that they want to go to, maybe they come to you and say, I think we want to use NetSuite. At what point, what are some of those things that you might see or uncover in a discovery conversation to go, you're not ready for this, or this is
Yeah.
just not going to work?
Probably a number one is their team. So we can walk into an organization and within moments be able to size up whether or not they've got the team to go next generation. Uh, it'll either present itself as a technical limitation, could also present itself as a professional attitude limitation. It could be a number of different things, right? But it becomes very identifiable very quickly that this team can or cannot handle it. And that's probably our most difficult conversation to have. That that a company has to have a talent rotation.
I like interesting term, talent rotation. I love it. It's a good term. But I think what you're really striking the heart of is um, the company that's going through this migration or this transition. They need to have the right folks in place that are prepared to make the change,
Yep.
behind the change, in front of the change. I mean, literally all in on this change. Because if you've got internal folks that are disagreeing on the decision, now you got sabotage and you've got
Oh,
walking and you've got all those other things.
yep.
The team,
Sabotage is a real thing.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's like, oh, well, my job's not going to be needed anymore if we make this change. Right. I'm gonna say, well, I don't think we should do that, right? Um, fascinating conversation. So I want to there's a question on the tip of my tongue related to that. So the team has got to be the right team. Um,
Yep.
I know some of the work that we do. So I've talked about this on several other episodes, but we don't just do QuickBooks stuff. We also do QuickBase. And
Right.
so, a little aside here, like when we are building like a custom application on QuickBase, sometimes we're having those conversations with the client to like you guys to say, tell me about your business process. Tell me what you're trying to do. Tell me how it works currently. And I just think it's so fun when we've got a team on the other end of the call and we're having them explain how to do something and then halfway through it somebody's going, we don't do that anymore. Okay, no, that's not how it works. No, we don't do that. We stopped doing that 3 years ago. We're doing it this way. And then somebody else is like, yes we are, yes we are, right? So I would imagine that presenting itself on a call is probably a telltale sign that there may be a team challenge.
Absolutely. Oh man, if you have an internal disconnect like that, it's like, well, I thought you were doing that. No, I thought you were doing that. And you literally are now identifying process gaps that are now costing the organization twice as much, right? Because it either is getting done or it is either not getting done by one or both. And now what's going on? So yeah, you will discover those idiosyncrasies quite fast in these discovery processes, right? It's can be entertaining.
It's always a little funny. I mean, we always are like, interesting. This is interesting. So there's only one way to do it, but everybody's doing it differently. Apparently,
Right, exactly.
it's one of my favorite phrases. That's interesting. You know,
Yes, that's kind of like a therapist, right? Like, tell me more.
exactly. So, all right. So let's talk about the next step. So let's say somebody is in the back of their mind, they're thinking, this is in my future, right? We need to get to this next generation, like you were saying. What are some of those things that I need as an organization, as a leadership team? What do I, as an accounting team, as a systems IT team, what are some of those things that I need to be doing or thinking about now to prepare myself if I'm, 6 months out, 12 months out, 24 months out to making a change like this?
Oh, wow. If you're that far out,
Or 2 weeks,
well,
2 weeks out.
2 weeks. That's an emergency. Well, nobody should ever do it that fast, first of all. Really, really what you want to do is you want to give yourself some grace. You really want to educate yourself. You need to pump your brakes. Just stop and learn. That's like got to be, I don't know, George, what do you think? Like number one, just stop. Stop and think.
Well, I think, the one thing that everybody, probably including us to some degree, is that most people store processes right here.
Mhm.
And when it's time to transfer that into a new system, you are relying on one person to know X and another person to know Y, and then you need both people to be able to create a new process resulting of that. For me, if I were to look at the first thing, if you're starting to prepare, pause, document, and then decide what the next steps are. I think if you don't have your business processes properly documented, it's going to present a challenge when you are trying to transfer those into new business processes or new systems or what have you. So I think this probably, in my mind, this is probably one of the biggest challenges.
Okay, this is good stuff. I mean, obviously, pumping the brakes, and starting to think about documenting and making sure that things are documented, the processes are documented. I think that's crucial. Um,
Huge.
I can also just imagine somebody's listening to this going, stop and pause. I don't have time. I don't have time to stop. I don't have time to pause. I got too much stuff going on. I'm putting out too many fires every day to think that I can just stop and, take the time to document. So obviously that's going to be a challenge. That's an everyday challenge, no matter what the organization is.
Sure.
One of the questions that I have, and I think you guys are going to be able to answer this incredibly well, is, again, we talk to clients all the time, and I think a lot of the times our clients are trying to do things themselves, and they don't have the expertise, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the experience, and so even though they're trying to do it themselves, a lot of times they come back to us, 3 weeks later, 3 months later, 6 months later, and they're like, well, we tried to do it ourselves, and now we realize that we really should have leaned on your expertise. So here's the question for you, teeing up, is at what point should they engage you guys even when they're thinking about this future decision in terms of process documentation? I've got to imagine with your knowledge and experience, you could be incredibly helpful in that process.
George, you want to try?
You go first. I'll go next.
Okay. Uh, immediately get engaged, right? If there's a thought, if there's a thought heading that direction, even at a just, hey, what should I do? Just a general conversation, just get some guidance, right? theoretically, as a professional who knows these processes, along with the entire industry who knows these processes, if they're doing the best thing in your best interest, they're not going to try to sell you instantaneously. They're going to try to help you work through these thoughts. That enables you to depend on them early on as a trusted advisor, because if they're just selling you a bill of goods, you're going to know that. But getting somebody involved early on so that the consequences of you trying something just because you saw something flashy and nice and really sexy and all these other things, yeah, that usually doesn't go well. Per your example, they tried, they crashed. Whoops. And now it's going to cost them twice as much, or perhaps even more, depending if, well, hopefully they didn't hurt themselves in the process.
And I think, sorry, Rob, go ahead.
I go, George.
I think another aspect of this that would make someone who can or who is more into the space than the actual business owner or somebody who's involved in the business is that, generally speaking, they may have done the research and maybe failed. But the key thing is that to note is that they usually probably don't know what they don't know. And that leaves a very big gap of unknown things that could help them solve their problem. This is actually where our team can be helpful, because when you come to me and I have seen 300 solutions and you've been exposed to 15 of them, well, there's that delta that I could probably, whip out of my inventory or arsenal of solutions and be like, this could work better for you, or we could go this direction because we've implemented that solution for X, Y, or Z client. This could work for you, right? So I think the factor that is the unknown to them and is known to us will put them in a good position to engage with us, so we could provide them with at least a good path. Even if we don't provide the solution, we can probably help guide in the right direction, and then that could probably correct, and maybe they could potentially find their own solution at that point, or maybe not. I don't know, but at least it will open the sort of the space for them to think through it.
Got it. Got it. Well, I want to go a little bit one more level deeper on the guidance component, because I think that's a value of folks like us, but folks like you guys, where you are experts at what you do. Okay, that's why you get paid what you get paid, because you are bringing a lot of value because of your knowledge and experience and expertise. So if I'm a potential client, I'm leaning on you guys for guidance. And so here's kind of like the related question that I want to ask related to that is, if I think of how I traditionally shop for things myself, okay, I Google, I look at some sort of comparison chart, and maybe I'm trying to buy two monitors, and I look at the differences and I'm like, oh, I don't want that, so maybe that's the one I want, right? For simple products, that's easier to do, right? I can just go Google and I can find some things. My question for you, long-winded way of asking this question, should I just be calling up NetSuite and saying, give me a demo, tell me about your solution? Should I just be calling up, Acumatica and Microsoft Dynamics and trying to get a demo? Or, what's the value of going directly to you guys first, not last, but first,
Yep.
to get some guidance in terms of what are the solutions and what I should be looking at?
Right. Well, the actual benefit is that we become that brake for you. We pump your brakes, slow you down, right? Help you figure out what you actually need. Yeah, sure, you're welcome to go to the showroom, kick the tires, and look at the demo, but you're going to see amazing stuff. Problem is, looking at that flashy, shiny thing may not actually work well for you. You may see one or two or three things that actually go, yes, that's what I need. But you may not be that technical team member that knows that for sure, right? You may have a sense of what you need, and somebody will take advantage of that. And that's usually what happens on those demo calls. you get sold.
Right.
Versus getting in front of an individual or a team like us who actually sits down and goes, well, why do you need this? What is the hardest thing you're trying to solve for today in your system? What does the future look like for you? And actually put that through thoughts and processes and results where you can actually now take that conversation, place it into a system or two or three, and say, look, this one did it, this one kind of did it, and this one does it not so well. It might need some customizations, but at least you know. You may have engaged that a team like ours and invested resources, money, and time for that. But the consequences of not doing something like that could be extraordinarily expensive because by the time that you find out you made a mistake, you're knee deep. And I mean, that's expensive in multiple versions of the term expensive.
Yeah, it's why I always like working personally. I always like working with folks that don't have skin in the game in terms of like the ultimate solution, right? If you know if I go to an insurance agent and they only sell one line of insurance, guess what I'm going to get offered, right?
Right.
Even if it's not the best solution for me, it's what they offer, right?
Yep.
I've heard so many horror stories of people that have called a manufacturer. I'll use NetSuite as one of many examples in that space where there's a sales rep on the phone and they're saying, "Oh yeah, I can do all that. It can do all that. It can do all that." But the salesperson on the phone or that's doing the demo has never done an implementation themselves. They've never done the technical deep dive implementation. They've done discovery calls, they've done sales calls, but they've never had to actually have a customer in front of them that's going, this isn't working, right? And I've heard so many horror stories from folks that have tried to migrate, and yeah, they were told it could do all these different things, and then a year later, literally a year later, they're finding out, oh, it doesn't do that. It can't do
Yeah.
that. And
Yep.
so I can just imagine, having a conversation with you guys, being able, again, looking at it objectively and going, we've worked with all of them. We've done implementations with all of them. We know what it can and can't do. And yeah, they said you could do that. You can't.
Right. Right.
Or it's not going to work that way, but it's going to work this way. Is that going to work for you? Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think Brad, this is a good point you bring up, and when can they call up NetSuite or Sage or whoever? Sure, they probably can, but I think that the answer that a software publisher is going to provide is a myopic view that is biased toward their product because they simply are not a consultant that is looking at your organization. They're looking at what they can fill, what hole they can fill that replaces current ERP with their ERP. Can they find parity and can they fit it, right? And that's it. While that may work in some cases, it doesn't work all the time. And it certainly is not all encompassing that covers your whole business process. And certainly if you are trying to make a change that is not simply replacing one for one, you do need someone who will have a broader view than just another ERP publisher trying to fit it into the functionality of the previous, because that will not really entail a lot of business process addressing change, improving. All these things will not happen from a publisher. I guarantee you that because I have gone through speaking with publishers. I know what they do. I know how it goes. It might work in certain cases, but in most, and if someone is looking for a certain level of guidance, in my opinion, the publisher is not where you go. You go to a VARC, you go to my ERP, you go to someone who is more well-rounded.
got it. Well, and hey, I want to also just kind of like maybe identify the pink elephant in the room too, and just ask and beg the question, in transparency. one of the things that really just, it frustrates me so much when we've been working with a client for years. They've been on QuickBooks for years. Let's say they're on desktop. We're a reseller of QuickBooks, right? We can sell people with QuickBooks. We can sell them QuickBooks Online. We can always save our clients money on that stuff. And it's just so frustrating when we call a customer up and they're like, "Oh yeah, we switched to QuickBooks Online, a couple months ago," and they didn't call us, and they didn't save money through us. Where one, we could have saved them money and also helped with that migration.
Yep.
It's always so frustrating when a customer spends more than they have to. So I know you guys are resellers on a few of those other next level systems. My
Yeah.
question for you though is there an additional benefit of working with you guys because you can potentially save them money on those next solutions as well?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we have very specific type of promotions, and given the fact that we work with certain publishers in a particular way, let's say Sage, for example, um, we have been able to save customers a tremendous amount of dollars migrating to a product like Sage Intacct for multiple reasons. One is what we can actually do on the price, first of all, how we can help offset some of that upfront risk in the first year that everybody's looking at, right? They're looking at what those first year dollars are costing them out of pocket. And we've been very successful at helping customers relieve some of that pressure. Not only just because we are contributing by saying, hey, look, we may even pay for that first year for you. That's how much we're serious about mitigating the risk. That doesn't include all of the other things and mechanisms we have when it comes to working with Sage, where they work on 3 and 5 year long-term contracts that really kind of help get those numbers down. So yeah, there's a huge, like you and your team, there are mechanisms that are at your disposal working directly with you that give you those levers to work with the customer directly at a better price point and a better value.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I mean, the overall moral to this story as we close is this stuff is complicated. It's not easy. It's always a little bit messy. Prepare for change, but rely on expertise. And so if you're listening to this show, you're watching this on YouTube and you're like, I really feel like at some point in the near future, this is something I'm going to need. How do they get a hold of you guys? How do they start a conversation with you about this thing so they're not trying it themselves, learning the hard way, spending more money than they have to? How do they get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, thanks for that. 855-867-555. Oh, sorry, I forgot the number.
7.
877-888-5525. Sorry, 877-888-5525. Hit that number one button for our fantastic sales engineering team who begins that conversation. Or you can reach out to me directly. You can just hit us up at sales@gotomyerp.com. Either way works. And as long as you refer to Brad or Vark in that subject line, that'll help us understand where you're coming from and why you're coming to us to talk.
Okay, thank you. And obviously, if anybody reaches out to us at barksolutions.com and you're like, hey, I listened to that show, it was something about go to my something or other, we'll connect the dots as well and be able to connect you up and get you over to George and Robert and their team to have that conversation. But I just want to encourage everybody that's listening, again, this is challenging stuff. This is not easy stuff. As much as I would love for you to be able to do it on your own and do it successfully, I just know from reality and from experience, it's less likely to happen without folks like George and Robert Go to My ERP. So as we conclude the show, George, Robert, just want to say thank you for being on the show. Thanks for coming and sharing your expertise, sharing your knowledge and your experience. So first off, thank you.
Yeah, Brad, thank you very much for having us. We always appreciate our relationship.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And for those of you that are listening, again, I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you got some value out of it. If you know folks that are going through this challenge, let them know that this show exists, and that there's a solution for that. Okay, tag word. So I always got to plug that in there every once in a while. So
Got it in there.
there is a solution for that. There is a solution for that. So thanks again, and for those of you that are subscribers to the show, we'll see you next week.
Bye. Thanks again, Brad.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time. There is a Solution for That is produced by VARC Solutions. This episode was produced by Ashley White and Aaron Riley. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Watch the video version on youtube.com/There's a Solution for That. Or visit varcsolutions.com/podcast, where you'll find our entire podcast archive, as well as show notes, links to solution providers, and complete transcripts of every episode. If you love the podcast, please leave a review with your comments.